get as far away from London as this coach would carry her. Of course, that hadn't meant that she wanted to continue to sit on top, exposed to the weather. She had some sense, and if everyone was leaving, why shouldn't she invite herself to sit in the coach? While the driver had been busy with the changing of the horses, she had scrambled down from her perch and climbed inside. The driver had objected to her move. He'd wanted to toss her back up onto the roof next to him, unless she paid the fare for the better seat. When she had tried to appeal to his goodwill, he had suggested there was one way a lass could earn her fare, and that was when Elise met her current travelling companion, who sat less than a foot from her on the hard leather seat. He was a complete ruffian. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, pulled low over his eyes, and a greatcoat made of oilskin, and sported what must have been several days' growth of beard. His boots were dusty and worn, as if he had already travelled a good distance, and had even farther to go. He certainly didn't appear to be anyone's champion, except he had become hers. The driver's coarse suggestion had shocked Elise, and she shouldn't have been. Wasn't this the reason gently reared young ladies needed to be chaperoned? To keep them from men's unsavoury lust? Except Elise had always believed that if any rude fellow dared to make a disrespectful comment to her, she would crush him with one cool look. She'd even practiced it in her looking-glass. However, in that moment, instead of being disdainful, she'd been so astonished by what he had suggested, and she wasn't completely certain that women actually did that to men. It sounded rather distasteful, that she'd frozen. Her, the one who was never at a loss for words, the worldly Lanscarr sister. That was the moment the ruffian had interfered and entered her life. He had approached the vehicle just as the driver had made his demand. Upon hearing it, or perhaps upon seeing the shock on her face, the newcomer had clapped a heavy hand on the driver's shoulder. In a low, gravelly voice, he had said to Elise, "Climb inside the coach." She'd hesitated. "Go on," he'd barked. This time, Elise had obeyed. The door had shut behind her, and then there was a thump, as if something, or more like someone, was shoved against the coach. Words were spoken, but the ruffian's voice was so low, Elise couldn't make out what was being said. Then the door had abruptly been yanked open, as if the ruffian didn't realise his own strength. He'd climbed aboard without comment, the coach leaning in his direction. He'd settled himself heavily on the seat, as if exhausted. His long legs took up most of the space between them, sending Elise scooting as far away from him as she could, literally squeezing herself in a corner. She covertly studied him. He'd removed his hat and rubbed his leather-gloved hands over his jaw, as if tired. His hair was dark and in need of a barber. He didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, he slapped the hat back on his head and closed his eyes, dismissing her completely. Elise didn't wish to talk to him. She would prefer to ignore him. Except there was something too, large about him. With those broad shoulders, it had probably been effortless for him to toss the burly coachman around. He also smelled of gin, or perhaps rum, and manliness. His scent, it swirled in the air around him. Still, she knew her manners. "Thank you," she had whispered. In response, he'd pulled the brim of his hat lower over his eyes. Elise gathered the hood of her cloak around her face. She could be aloof too. And then the driver had shouted at the horses, the male guard had blown his horn, and they had been off, leaving Elise alone with her thoughts and her doubts. In truth, she needed to guard against her fears. Any wavering of her intentions to reach Ireland would see her back to her sisters, Gwendolen and Dara, and her great-aunt Tweety. She didn't think they'd learned she'd run away yet. Last night, when Elise had slipped the money for her trip from the carved wood box where Gwendolen kept the sisters' personal funds, she left a note promising she would pay back every penny. She wasn't certain how yet, but she would honour her word. She'd also asked them to not worry. She would be fine. Since they all now lived with Dara and her new husband, Michael Brogan, a week could possibly go by before the box was touched. As to her absence, she'd been spending so much time as her friend Lady Whitby's guest, they would